Get out! I don't have time to explain who you are.
Identity confirmed. Isaiah Carrington. Sir, your father ordered the main gate opened.
The black SUV slowed before the Sustone entrance to Briarwood, then stopped 30 yards short of the security booth. Rain had darkened the gravel. Isaiah Reed, a 36-year-old black preservation engineer, sat in the front passenger seat with one hand resting on a canvas tool bag between his shoes. White plaster dust clung to the cuffs of his work jacket. He wore the same work jacket he had been wearing when the call came the day before, its cuffs still marked with white plaster dust from a Baltimore school restoration. Evelyn kept both hands on the steering wheel. Her black dress was restrained and expensive. In the rear seat, her mother, Margaret, adjusted one pearl earring. Grant Holloway, a white investment manager in a charcoal suit, sat beside her, watching the gates through tinted glass. "You need to get out," Evelyn said. Isaiah turned toward her. She did not. "You want me to use the employee entrance?" A muscle moved near her jaw. "I don't have time to explain who you are to everyone inside." The answer settled between them, worse because she had chosen each word. Margaret reached past Isaiah for the canvas bag. "People here will be more comfortable if Evelyn arrives with Grant," she said, as though correcting a seating chart. She placed the bag on the wet gravel. The metal clasp struck stone with a flat click. Grant opened his door without speaking, walked around the SUV, waited for Isaiah to step out, then took the seat beside Evelyn. He did not smile. Isaiah stood in the rain and looked at the woman he had married 5 years earlier. Her eyes finally met his. There was strain in them, but no surprise. "We should separate," she said. "I'm tired of making my life smaller for someone who only wants to repair things everyone else has left behind." Isaiah felt the sentence land in more than one place. He could have told her abandoned things were often abandoned by people with enough money to leave. Instead, he closed the door. The SUV rolled forward. At the booth, a young security officer stepped out with a tablet against his chest. He leaned toward the driver's window and looked first at Grant. "Good morning, sir. Name for the list?" Grant gave Evelyn's name before his own. The officer searched twice. Margaret lowered her window and began explaining who they expected to meet inside. Isaiah approached along the edge of the lane carrying his bag. The officer saw him and lifted one hand. "Sir, guests need to stay clear of the drive. Service access is through the east gate." He pointed before checking Isaiah's face. Evelyn looked down at the wheel. "I'm here for the memorial," Isaiah said. The officer's expression tightened. "The east gate can direct contractors." Then the camera above the booth shifted. A soft alert sounded inside. The officer glanced at his screen. His posture changed before his face did. The display showed a protected family match, visible only from inside the booth. Isaiah Carrington. For 1 second, no one moved. The officer looked at Isaiah, then back at the screen, as if the two versions could not occupy the same space. The main gates opened inward. Marcus Bell came through first, gray at the temples, moving with the calm of a man who never hurried to prove authority. Renee Whitaker followed with a leather folder beneath one arm. Marcus stopped in front of Isaiah. "Mr. Carrington, your father instructed us to receive you through the main gate." Inside the SUV, Margaret went still. Evelyn's fingers loosened from the wheel. Grant reached into his coat and took out his phone. Isaiah picked up the tool bag. "My wife comes in," he said. "I'm authorizing her to attend the private estate briefing as my spouse." Renee nodded. Isaiah looked toward the rear seat. Not Mrs. Carter, not Mr. Holloway. Grant showed no anger. He only placed a call as the gate began closing between them. Isaiah walked beside Renee. When they were far enough from the booth, she lowered her voice. "Your father left an incomplete file on Holloway, and someone on the board registered him as an advisor for tomorrow's meeting." Isaiah did not look back. Behind him, Grant was already speaking to Clayton Pierce. 7 years earlier, before Briarwood, before the black SUV and wet gravel, Isaiah met Evelyn Carter at Blackwood Station. The station had served Baltimore's black neighborhoods for generations before neglect left its waiting room, warped, broken, and rain-stained. Evelyn had been hired to help raise money for its restoration. Isaiah stood beside old blueprints and explained why the deepest damage could not be fixed with fresh paint. A crack is only the message, he told the donors. You have to find what moved underneath it. Evelyn watched him speak without notes, his voice steady enough to make ruined walls sound worth saving. Later, she asked for another tour. She listened as he described the ticket windows, brass rails, and waiting room where families once gathered before heading north. What drew her to him was not the romance of old buildings. It was the care he gave to things other people had decided were finished. Months later, Evelyn's father was admitted to a hospital outside Richmond after a mild heart attack. Isaiah was nearly 4 hours away. Rain had closed part of the interstate, and Evelyn told him not to come. He came anyway. He arrived after midnight with water, a phone charger, and a dry coat. He sat beside her until 3 in the morning, speaking only when she needed him to. Before dawn, she rested her head against his shoulder and said, "This is when I knew." Knew what? That I wanted to marry you. For years, Isaiah believed that version of Evelyn was the truest one. During their first year of marriage, they attended a fundraiser for Blackwood Station at a downtown hotel. As they approached the entrance, a white man stepped from a sedan and pressed his keys into Isaiah's palm without looking at his face. Before Isaiah could speak, Evelyn did. "He's the lead engineer on the project you just donated to." The man's confidence collapsed into embarrassment. He apologized twice. Evelyn took Isaiah's hand and led him inside without letting the moment become a joke. Isaiah remembered the pressure of her fingers. She had seen what happened and refused to make him carry it alone. 3 years later, at a private club in Annapolis, a server hurried toward Isaiah and placed a silver drink tray into his hands while reaching for a fallen napkin. The mistake lasted only a second. Isaiah stood beside Evelyn in a tailored jacket, wearing the same silver watch. The server looked up, realized, and took the tray back with a nervous apology. Evelyn had seen everything. This time, she turned toward the couple she had been speaking with and continued the conversation. On the drive home, Isaiah asked why she had said nothing. Evelyn stared through the windshield. He made a mistake. He didn't mean anything by it. That wasn't what I asked. Her hands tightened around the wheel. You can't turn every awkward moment into a statement about race. Sometimes people are careless. Isaiah watched the highway lights slide across the glass. The server's mistake did not stay with him. Evelyn's silence did. She had once known the difference between preserving peace and protecting the comfort of the room. Now she treated them as the same thing. The third crack appeared without confrontation. Evelyn changed the words she used. At dinners, she stopped calling Isaiah a preservation engineer. She began saying he worked in renovation, then shortened that to contracting. By the time her firm courted larger investors, she introduced him as someone who fixes old buildings. Isaiah asked why. Evelyn said investors understood simple language. But Isaiah knew what she had removed: the license, the training, the crews he managed, the public buildings he had saved. She was no longer staying silent, while others made him smaller. She was helping them do it. At an infrastructure conference in Washington, Evelyn used the phrase again while speaking to Grant Holloway. "My husband does small restoration work," she said. Grant glanced across the room at Isaiah, then returned his attention to her. His sympathy looked rehearsed. "Do you ever feel," he asked, "like you've entered a room larger than the life your husband wants?" Evelyn did not answer. She did not walk away either. Isaiah had been born Isaiah Carrington, though almost no one outside Briarwood knew it. When he was 9, a dark sedan began appearing behind the car that took him to school. It followed for several mornings, never close enough to force a confrontation, never far enough to be dismissed. Nathaniel's security team later learned that 2 men connected to a contract dispute had been collecting information about the Carrington family's routines. They never touched Isaiah. They never reached the house. The threat ended before it became a crime anyone could describe cleanly, but Nathaniel never forgot how near it had come. Within weeks, Isaiah disappeared from public records tied to Carrington Meridian. He began using Reed, his mother's last name. After she died when he was 12, the name became more than protection. It was the only part of his life that did not lead back to his father's wealth. Nathaniel never ordered him to change it again. He also refused to place Isaiah inside the company simply because he could. A title given too early becomes a room with no doors, he once told him. Isaiah chose engineering, then architectural preservation, and built a reputation under a name that opened no private offices for him. Nathaniel respected that choice, though he did not always understand it. The two men met several times a year at Briarwood. They walked the southern fields, argued over public investment, and studied old construction plans at the long table in Nathaniel's library. Their final shared project was Blackwood Station. Isaiah wanted to convert the abandoned terminal into a vocational campus with workshops extending behind the original structure. Nathaniel supported the school, but insisted the stone facade remain untouched. People need to recognize what survived, he said. Isaiah thought survival without adaptation could become another kind of ruin. They debated the eastern roof for months. Nathaniel favored rebuilding it along the original line. Isaiah wanted to raise it 6 feet to bring natural light into the workshops. Neither man yielded. 3 weeks before Nathaniel died, he called. Isaiah saw his father's name on the screen and let it ring. He was angry, because Nathaniel had once again warned him not to reveal the Carrington connection until the voting trust was ready. Isaiah had spent years living between two names, and that morning he no longer wanted to hear another explanation about safety or timing. Nathaniel left a message. "Call when you're ready. We still haven't solved the eastern roof." Isaiah told himself he would return the call after work, then after dinner, then the next morning. He never did. Evelyn had also come close to hearing the truth more than once. Isaiah had rehearsed the conversation in his truck, in hotel rooms, and beside her while she slept. Each time he imagined the questions that would follow. Why had he hidden Briarwood? Why had he let her worry about money? Why had he watched her speak about ambition without telling her what stood behind his name? He claimed he was waiting for the right moment. The truth was less generous. He feared that once Evelyn knew, he would never again be certain whether she saw Isaiah Reed or the Carrington inheritance. Silence protected him from that uncertainty, but it also denied her the chance to decide with the full truth. While Isaiah delayed, Grant Holloway moved carefully. For nearly 2 years, Holloway Capital had pursued Meridian Community Water. Nathaniel rejected every approach. Grant's plan depended on raising rates across 12 towns, delaying pipe repairs, and replacing local contractors with firms connected to his own fund. Grant eventually found Evelyn's name in records from a preservation foundation supported by Carrington Meridian. He did not know Isaiah was Nathaniel's heir. He only suspected Evelyn stood near a door into the company. He began with professional invitations, then dinners, introductions, and praise aimed at the part of her that felt overlooked. He never told her to leave Isaiah. He simply treated every disappointment in her marriage as proof that Isaiah had made her life too small. Nathaniel's team uncovered only fragments. Holloway's interest in the water division, Evelyn's appearance in a security report, and unusual contact between Grant's representatives and board members Clayton Pierce and Samuel Brooks. It was not enough to accuse anyone. Nathaniel asked Renee Whitaker to preserve the material on an offline drive until the pattern became clearer. A few weeks later, he died from a cerebral hemorrhage. By then, the unfinished file was locked inside Briarwood, and Nathaniel's final voicemail was still sitting unheard in Isaiah's phone. Renee called Isaiah while he stood on the eastern roof of Reed Elementary in Baltimore, one hand pressed against a cracked limestone cap. Wind moved beneath his work jacket, carrying the smell of wet brick and old wood. He watched her name pulse across the screen before answering. Renee did not soften the news. Nathaniel had suffered a cerebral hemorrhage at Briarwood shortly after dawn. By the time paramedics reached the estate, he could not be revived. Isaiah asked what time it happened. Renee told him. He did the calculation without meaning to. His father had died while Isaiah was driving to the site, coffee cooling in the cup holder, Nathaniel's final voicemail still unopened on his phone. He climbed down, gave his crew brief instructions, then sat in his truck with both hands resting on the steering wheel. The building remained visible through the windshield, its roof opened in 3 places, the damaged beams exposed to daylight. Isaiah stayed there for nearly an hour. He listened to the first few seconds of Nathaniel's message twice, but stopped before the end. He could not bear the ordinary warmth in his father's voice. When he finally drove home, grief followed quietly, occupying the passenger seat without asking permission. Evelyn arrived after dark. She set her purse on the kitchen counter and noticed Isaiah sitting at the table without the lights on. He told her someone important had died and that he needed to attend a private memorial at Briarwood the following morning. She paused. For a moment, he thought she might cross the room and sit beside him. "Who will be there?" she asked. Isaiah looked at her, waiting for the question she had not asked. It never came. He still told her she could join him. Part of him remembered a hospital corridor 7 years earlier, rainwater drying on his coat while Evelyn slept against his shoulder. He wanted to believe sorrow might lead them back to the people they had once been. By morning, Margaret had decided she was coming. Evelyn said her mother understood formal memorials and could help avoid social mistakes. Grant offered to ride along, claiming his presence would make introductions easier if Evelyn encountered board members connected to her work. Isaiah told them the memorial was private. Evelyn insisted, and in his exhaustion, he let the gate decide what he no longer had the strength to argue. The black SUV left Baltimore under a low gray sky. Isaiah sat in front beside Evelyn. Margaret and Grant occupied the rear seat. For the first 40 minutes, they discussed names Isaiah had known most of his life, but could not acknowledge: Clayton Pierce, Samuel Brooks, Abigail Shaw. Grant asked which board members might arrive before the service and whether Evelyn could introduce him without making it seem arranged. Margaret studied Isaiah's work jacket and suggested they stop somewhere so he could change. "Briarwood won't be the kind of place where people understand this look," she said. Isaiah glanced down at the plaster on his sleeve. "What look?" Margaret smiled as if he had forced her to explain something obvious. "Work clothes at a private memorial." No one asked whom they were mourning. At a highway rest stop, Evelyn took a call from one of her firm's senior partners. She stood near the SUV with the door open, speaking brightly about the people she expected to meet. "Grant Holloway is with me," she said. "He's acting as a strategic advisor today." A pause followed. Evelyn looked toward Isaiah. "My husband, he restores old buildings." She shut the door after the call and found Grant watching Isaiah in the rearview mirror. Something passed across Grant's face, brief and controlled. He had spent months trying to reduce Isaiah in Evelyn's mind. He understood then that she had already begun doing the work for him. As Briarwood's stone walls appeared beyond the trees, Grant suggested he sit beside Evelyn when they entered. The request became a decision before Isaiah answered. By the time Briarwood's gates closed behind Isaiah, the hope that grief might repair his marriage was gone. Marcus led him away from the main hall and toward Nathaniel's old drafting room. Marcus led Isaiah away from the main hall, through a narrow side corridor lined with photographs of Briarwood under construction. At the end stood the old drafting room, untouched since Nathaniel's death. The plans for Blackwood Station covered the center table. Isaiah moved closer and found his father's handwriting by the unfinished eastern roof. 4 words written in dark blue ink. Let Isaiah decide. He placed one hand on the paper. For the first time since Renee's call, grief broke through the anger. The drafting room held more than Blackwood's unfinished plans. Renee opened a walnut cabinet beside Nathaniel's desk and removed a narrow document box. Inside lay a 5-page letter, an offline drive, Nathaniel's pocket watch, the voting trust agreement, and a video player. Isaiah touched the watch first. Its silver case carried a dent near the hinge, made years earlier when Nathaniel dropped it beside a rail line. Renee placed the player before him. He recorded this 6 days before he died. Nathaniel appeared on the screen in Briarwood's library. He looked tired, but his voice remained precise. "I do not know what Evelyn has chosen. I also do not know how far Holloway has gone. I know only that you should not have to begin from nothing." The drive contained verified facts, unanswered questions, and no conclusions Isaiah was required to accept. Holloway Capital had pursued Meridian Community Water. Clayton Pierce and Samuel Brooks had exchanged unusual messages with people tied to the fund. Evelyn's name had appeared near the edge of a security report. Nathaniel had not found proof of a coordinated scheme. He refused to turn suspicion into judgment. "Finish the work," he said. "Then decide what the facts deserve." Renee slid the trust agreement across the desk. Nathaniel had left Isaiah 60% of Carrington Meridian's voting power, but the shares remained inside a voting trust until 3 conditions were met. Isaiah's identity and inheritance had to be confirmed. The trustees had to determine that no direct legal dispute threatened the transfer. Isaiah also had 7 days to present a temporary governance plan. Until then, the board could continue ordinary business. It could not complete the sale of an essential asset, but it could approve a 30-day exclusivity agreement. Such an agreement would give one buyer sole negotiating rights and deeper access to internal records. It would not sell Meridian Community Water tomorrow, Renee said. It would let Holloway place his hands around it. Renee convened a private estate and succession briefing that afternoon in Briarwood's library. Fewer than 50 people attended: trustees, executives, legal representatives, and family associates. Evelyn sat 3 chairs from Isaiah. Rain still marked one sleeve of her black coat. When Renee announced the 60% voting interest, the room seemed to contract. Evelyn remained seated, staring at Isaiah as though she had discovered a second face beneath the one she knew. After the briefing, she approached slowly. 5 years, she said. You let me live beside you for 5 years without knowing any of this. Isaiah found no answer capable of making his silence honest. He could explain the threat from his childhood, his mother's name, Nathaniel's rules, and his fear that money would change their marriage. None altered the fact that he had denied her the truth. "I should have told you," he said. Evelyn's eyes shone, though she refused to let the tears fall. "Yes, you should have." Grant was not present. Clayton had registered him as a financial advisor for the next morning's board session. In Nathaniel's study, Renee showed Isaiah the proposal Holloway Capital intended to place before the board. A $50 billion exclusivity agreement covering Meridian Community Water. If approved, Holloway would control negotiations for 30 days and gain access to forecasts, maintenance schedules, municipal contracts, and pricing data. Isaiah studied the signature page. Clayton's initials were already in the margin. Across the hall, Evelyn's phone vibrated. A message from Grant appeared: "Do not give them a statement or sign any acknowledgement. If he hid this from you, there is much more you do not know." Evelyn read it twice, closed it without deleting it. Grant Holloway could not challenge Isaiah's inheritance in his own name. Through Clayton and Samuel, he persuaded the board's special committee to file an emergency petition questioning the authenticity of the succession documents. By noon the following day, the Maryland court overseeing the dispute had agreed to review it. The filing claimed Nathaniel's succession documents might have been prepared under undisclosed influence. It cited Isaiah's hidden identity as evidence that earlier legal declaration required review, then attached 3 internal documents suggesting the trust had been revised without proper oversight. The documents looked authentic. Dates aligned. Signatures appeared in the right places. Several paragraphs had been removed, leaving language that sounded more troubling than it had in full. The court did not give Grant control of anything. The judge issued a 7-day temporary stay on the transfer of Isaiah's 60% voting interest while the disputed records were authenticated. 7 days sounded brief until the board scheduled a vote on Holloway Capital's exclusivity agreement 48 hours later. Isaiah read the order in Nathaniel's study. Renee stood across the desk, one hand resting beside the pocket watch. "They cannot sell the water division," she said. "They can still open the door." Grant was working through 3 channels. Clayton Pierce and Samuel Brooks handled the board. Estate Counsel had given Evelyn access to a restricted portal containing documents relevant to her marital rights. A permissions error exposed 3 preliminary succession files. A Northline strategy contractor then used a browser session Evelyn had previously shared with Grant to download them. At the direction of Grant's office, the contractor changed dates, removed contextual paragraphs, and returned altered copies through an anonymous account. Then the gatehouse video appeared online. It began seconds after Evelyn told Isaiah to use the employee entrance. Viewers saw the tool bag on the gravel, Isaiah standing outside the SUV, and Briarwood's staff opening the main gate for a man whose wife apparently had not known he belonged there. The missing seconds changed the meaning. Some saw a betrayed husband. Others saw a wealthy heir who had concealed his identity, waited for his wife to embarrass herself, then allowed security cameras to capture the result. Northline never used openly racial language. Its commentators repeated safer phrases. Commentators described Isaiah as inexperienced, too closely associated with hands-on work, and better suited to community projects than global governance. Each phrase sounded neutral alone. Together they drew the same boundary Isaiah had met at hotel entrances, private clubs, and now his father's boardroom. At the emergency meeting, Clayton called him Mr. Reed twice after Renee introduced him as Isaiah Reed Carrington. When Grant joined by video, Clayton welcomed Mr. Holloway, founder and managing partner of Holloway Capital. Isaiah corrected nothing the second time. He watched who noticed. Tasha Monroe noticed. She sat near the end of the table with the succession records open on her laptop. One file showed it had been sent on a Monday. Its creation data showed Thursday. Tasha checked the backup. Same discrepancy. She opened a preliminary compliance report. Clayton appeared beside her before she could finish. "Close it," he said quietly. "A timestamp error is not a conspiracy." Tasha looked up. Clayton signed her annual review. His recommendation would decide whether she received the promotion she had worked toward for 3 years. A false accusation could follow her through every compliance office in the industry. "I haven't called it anything," she said. "I'm documenting the mismatch." Clayton's smile remained, but warmth left it. Good judgment includes knowing when not to turn a technical issue into a serious allegation. Across the room, Abigail Shaw studied Holloway's financial presentation. The report projected strong returns after the exclusivity period, but one table referred to Appendix 7. The packet moved directly from Appendix 6 to Appendix 8. She asked Samuel for the missing section. He said it had been removed during formatting. Abigail requested the original. Samuel looked toward Clayton before answering. That glance lasted less than a second. It was enough. Near midnight, Tasha returned to her office after most of the floor had gone dark. The system was scheduled for an overnight update that could overwrite temporary access logs. She submitted a formal preservation request, copied Renee, and saved the receipt outside the local network. At the same time, Abigail emailed Clayton again for Appendix 7. His reply arrived 3 minutes later. "The material is no longer relevant to the board's decision." Abigail read the sentence twice. Then she forwarded it to herself and began looking for the document without it. Isaiah had a title everyone knew and no authority he could use. While the court hold kept his voting power out of reach, news panels turned his marriage and the edited gatehouse video into evidence for whatever story they preferred. He stopped watching after one host asked whether he had hidden his identity to manufacture public sympathy. He left Briarwood before sunrise and drove back to Reed Elementary. The Old East building was being converted into vocational workshops. Its windows had been removed, sections of walls stood open, and the air carried the clean, dry smell of cut lumber beneath the older scent of damp plaster. Isaiah parked outside the temporary gate. A white supplier in a company jacket approached ahead of him, raised an identification card from several feet away, and continued through without slowing. The new gate attendant nodded him in. A moment later, a 22-year-old black apprentice named Darius Cole stepped forward. Darius had worked on the project for months. Isaiah had seen him replace damaged joists, repair sash windows, and arrive early enough to prepare tools before the rest of the crew. The attendant held up one hand. "I need the card closer." Darius handed it over. The attendant studied both sides. "Registration paperwork? It's on file. Who supervises you?" Darius gave the name. The attendant looked toward the office trailer, then back at the card. "You'll need to wait while I confirm it." Isaiah stepped beside them. "His access is active. I approved it." The attendant turned, recognized Isaiah from the news, and changed at once. His shoulders relaxed, his voice softened. "Mr. Carrington, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were here." He handed the card back and opened the gate. "You're good to go." Darius took it without anger. That restraint disturbed Isaiah more than outrage would have. They walked several yards before Darius stopped. "If you weren't standing here today, what would have happened?" Isaiah looked back at the gate. The supplier had already disappeared into the building. The attendant was checking his phone. Isaiah could have offered a reassuring answer about training or procedures. None would have answered the question. Inside the East Wing, workers were removing paint from a wall that looked sound from the hallway. Beneath the smooth surface, years of moisture had darkened the wooden studs. One beam broke apart when a carpenter pressed a gloved thumb against it. The damage had been spreading long before anyone opened the wall. Isaiah stood there longer than the inspection required. He thought of Evelyn defending him at one fundraiser, then choosing silence at another. He thought of Grant's language moving through the press, polished enough to sound neutral while placing him outside the rooms his father had built. He thought of his own silence, the years he had spent calling avoidance patience. Renee arrived shortly after noon, carrying Nathaniel's letter in a protective folder. She found Isaiah in an unfinished classroom, sitting on an overturned bucket beneath the exposed roofline. "There was one page I held back," she said. "He instructed me to give it to you only if you considered using the full file publicly." Isaiah read the final paragraph in his father's compressed handwriting. "Evidence can help you stop one person from harming another. It can also help you humiliate them. Those are not the same act." Nathaniel had underlined the last sentence once. Isaiah read it again, then folded the page along its original crease. By evening, he had made 4 decisions. Private messages between Evelyn and Grant would remain private unless they proved corporate misconduct. He would not use inherited assets to threaten Evelyn during the divorce. No employee would be dismissed before an independent review. And Isaiah would not preside over any portion of the board meeting involving his marriage. He asked Abigail Shaw to serve as independent chair. He also agreed to abstain from decisions concerning Evelyn alone. Grant's conduct would be judged through access records, financial interests, and board communications, not through Isaiah's pain. Renee studied him after the call ended. "Do you trust Abigail to be fair?" Isaiah looked through the open wall toward the workshop floor, where Darius had returned to work. "I don't need her to believe me," he said. "I need her to read the entire record." Tasha Monroe spent the morning reconstructing a path no one expected her to follow. The disputed succession files had been downloaded through the authenticated browser session linked to Evelyn's restricted portal account. Minutes later, altered versions appeared in a transfer folder controlled by a contractor for Northline Strategy, the communications firm Grant had hired. The final break came from a maintenance request bearing Clayton Pierce's authorization. It instructed information technology staff to clear temporary access logs after the overnight update. Tasha copied each record under evidence preservation protocol, documented every transfer, and placed the originals in restricted storage. After completing the chain of custody, she called Renee. Clayton called 10 minutes later. His voice was gentle. "You understand I sign your promotion recommendation." Tasha looked at the sealed evidence receipt on her screen. "Then my report will include this call too." Clayton ended the call without saying goodbye. Across town, Abigail Shaw followed a different trail. Appendix 7 had not disappeared. An archived version remained attached to a previous committee calendar. Abigail opened it and found the assumptions omitted from the board presentation. Holloway Capital's projected return depended on substantial rate increases across 12 towns, postponement of major pipe replacements, and cancellation of local service contracts. Without those changes, the promised profit did not exist. Clayton had not merely summarized the proposal. He had removed the page showing who would pay for it. Abigail had entered the week uncertain whether Isaiah could lead the company. That question remained. But someone had withheld material information from the board she was obligated to serve. She called Renee, and agreed to chair the meeting. Evelyn opened the Northline workspace Grant had once shared with her and discovered that an internal folder had been left visible through a permissions error. Inside was an unreleased statement labeled Contingency Response. It described her as an angry wife who had stolen confidential files without Holloway Capital's knowledge. It claimed she had used a personal relationship to mislead investors and that Grant's firm had been deceived by her. Her name appeared 11 times. Grant's appeared only in denials. Evelyn read until the words blurred. She had believed he saw her ambition clearly. He had measured it, used it, and prepared to make it evidence against her. She told Margaret only that she was going to Briarwood, then ended the call before her mother could argue. Renee received her in a conference room beside the library. Evelyn placed her phone on the table and gave Renee access to the shared archive. Then she stated what she could prove. She had allowed Grant to use her laptop. She had sent him 2 documents. She knew he wanted access to the board. She had told Isaiah to use the employee entrance. The video online had been cut before that sentence. Grant had access to the archive containing the statement prepared to blame her. Renee listened without offering comfort. "Your testimony will not require Isaiah to forgive you." Evelyn's face tightened. "I didn't come to ask for that." Margaret arrived before the affidavit was finished. She told Evelyn that testimony would destroy the family's reputation. Evelyn looked at her mother for several seconds. "What reputation?" Margaret had no answer that did not reveal what Evelyn had finally begun to see. 90 minutes before the vote, 3 choices entered the official record. Abigail accepted the chair. Tasha completed the technical file. Evelyn signed her statement. Down the hall, the board began taking its seats. Grant Holloway entered the boardroom. He did not speak like a man trying to take Carrington Meridian. He spoke like a caretaker arriving after everyone else had failed. The succession was stalled. The probate court had imposed a hold. The company faced public scrutiny. Its designated heir had no executive record. A $50 billion opportunity, Grant said, could vanish while the board waited. He used the word stewardship until it sounded less like a principle than a lock. Abigail Shaw sat at the head of the table. Isaiah took the last chair and did not interrupt. When Abigail invited him to speak, Isaiah looked. "Do not decide this based on whether you believe me," he said. "Decide it based on what they did." Tasha went first. Her hands remained steady, though Clayton watched her like someone memorizing a betrayal. She traced the access path from Evelyn's laptop to a Northline strategy contractor, then showed when the files had been downloaded, altered, and returned. Dates had changed. Context had been removed. Temporary logs were scheduled for deletion. Grant leaned back. "Ms. Monroe is a junior employee interpreting records beyond her role." Abigail looked at him. "Answer the records, not the person presenting them." His smile disappeared. Renee opened the second file. Emails showed Clayton had been promised a senior position in the acquisition company. Samuel had been offered preferred shares unavailable to other investors. Ownership records linked the proposed buyers through holding companies to Holloway Capital. Neither man had disclosed those interests. Samuel lowered his eyes. Clayton called the messages preliminary. Renee asked whether preliminary conflicts were exempt from disclosure. He gave no answer. The third file contained the unreleased statement prepared to blame Evelyn for the stolen documents. Attached notes recommended using photographs of Isaiah in work clothes, emphasizing Reed rather than Carrington, describing him as unstable under questioning, and omitting his engineering license. No sentence mentioned race, but the pattern became clear when the instructions were read together. Together, the instructions created a contrast. Grant was familiar and executive, Isaiah physical, emotional, and out of place. Evelyn appeared by secure video. She confirmed that Grant knew the files came through her laptop and had urged her not to speak with independent counsel. Grant shifted toward Isaiah's deception in the marriage. Abigail stopped him. "Their marriage did not authorize you to alter documents or purchase influence on this board." The vote followed. The exclusivity agreement failed. Clayton and Samuel were suspended pending investigation. The board referred the evidence to regulators and federal prosecutors, ordered an independent review of Meridian Community Water, and certified that no internal dispute justified further delay. Grant left with his attorneys. No one stopped him. The board sent its findings and Tasha's technical report to the court. Later that afternoon, the judge dissolved the temporary stay. Abigail signed the final board certification, and the voting trustees transferred Nathaniel's 60% voting interest to Isaiah. He did not dismiss the staff or replace the board overnight. He appointed a temporary oversight committee and ordered operations to continue. That evening, he met Evelyn at the abandoned Blackwood station. Nathaniel's plans remained across the drafting table. Evelyn asked whether he had ever intended to tell her. "Yes," Isaiah said. "Then every time I came close, I watched you choose another room instead of choosing me." He admitted that his silence had damaged the marriage too. Evelyn asked whether they could begin again. Isaiah looked at the unfinished eastern roof. "Some structures can be saved by repairing them," he said. "Others can only be documented honestly before people move on." He did not threaten her. He simply ended what neither could restore. The divorce took 7 months. There were no dramatic hearings, no attempt by Isaiah to leave Evelyn with nothing. She received the portion of their shared property the law recognized as hers, but Nathaniel's inheritance, the voting trust, and the Carrington shares remained outside the settlement. Evelyn issued a public statement, confirming that the gatehouse video had been edited and stating exactly what she had said before the recording began. The statement cost her several clients and did not restore the trust she had broken. Isaiah read it once, then placed it in a file with the divorce papers. Telling the truth late was better than preserving a lie, but it did not turn the past into something else. Grant's consequences arrived more slowly. Federal investigators examined the altered succession records and the financial promises made to Clayton and Samuel. Carrington Meridian filed a civil action against Holloway Capital. Several institutional partners withdrew their money rather than wait for the investigations to end. Grant continued appearing in public with attorneys beside him, insisting that routine negotiations had been misrepresented. No verdict came quickly. Isaiah had learned enough about damaged structures to know that collapse was rarely as immediate as the sound people imagined. Sometimes the supports weakened quietly, one connection at a time. During his first year as chairman, Isaiah announced only 3 major commitments. Water rates in the 12 towns served by Meridian Community Water would remain stable for 8 years. Contractor applications would be reviewed through an independent process, and every rejection would require a written explanation that could be appealed. Blackwood Station would become the Institute's main campus, while Reed Elementary's East Building would serve as its restoration training annex. He rejected proposals to name the institution after Nathaniel Carrington. The decision confused some board members and quietly offended others. Isaiah offered no long explanation. 1 year after the vote, the restored Blackwood facade opened beneath a clear September sky. Behind the old stone walls, new workshops extended beneath the raised eastern roof. Isaiah and his father had never finished debating. Morning light crossed the steel tables and newly installed water testing stations. Above the entrance, carved into limestone, were the words, "The Reed School of Restoration and Water Technology." Tasha Monroe directed the Institute's compliance program, teaching ULT trainees how records, contracts, and access rules could protect communities or quietly exclude them. Abigail Shaw signed the first community oversight agreement in the former ticket hall. Marcus arrived carrying the canvas tool bag. Isaiah had asked him to bring from Briarwood, the same one Margaret had placed on the gravel outside the gate. He had cleaned the metal clasp but left a pale stain along one side. "Some marks belong to the object now," Marcus said. Isaiah ran his thumb across the canvas. "So do some repairs." In the library, a small glass case held Nathaniel's pocket watch beside the unfinished Blackwood plans. The eastern roof was still drawn in 2 versions, Nathaniel's lower line in dark pencil and Isaiah's raised workshop roof in blue. Along the margin, Nathaniel's handwriting remained visible. "Let Isaiah decide." Isaiah stood before it after the opening ceremony. For years he had believed his father's final gift was control of the company. Now he understood that Nathaniel had left him something more difficult: permission to make a choice without knowing whether the man who raised him would have agreed. A trainee named Malcolm stopped beside him and looked from the plans to the name above the entrance. "Everyone knows you're a Carrington now," he said. "Why keep Reed on the building?" Isaiah looked through the library windows. His tool bag rested near the workshop door. Beyond it, engineers, tradespeople, local contractors, and company officers crossed the same floor without separate entrances or status-coded badges marking who belonged where. He thought of his mother, whose name had protected him before he understood what protection cost. He thought of his father, whose watch had measured a final phone call Isaiah never returned. "Because Reed was my name before anyone knew what I owned," he said. A bell sounded from the first restoration workshop. Guests began moving toward the stage prepared for the formal dedication, where a chair bearing Isaiah's name waited beneath the company's seal. Isaiah did not take it. He picked up the canvas bag, joined the trainees entering the workshop, and closed the door behind them only after everyone had passed through. Which moment in Isaiah's story stayed with you the most? And where are you watching from? Share it in the comments and subscribe for more stories about dignity, truth, and justice.